All right, the waiting time is gone. I think we've given people sufficient time to join us. So I'll invite our panelists to bring their videos back on so that we can get cracking. I'm going to start by welcoming everyone to this BNLF webinar on the opportunities for trade and mutual exchange and also business between the UK and Nigeria, where we're going to be considering questions of risks and legal issues arising therefrom. I am Ololade Sharomi. I am the present chair of the British Nigeria Law Forum, and I am also a commercial barrister practicing from a barrister's chambers in London called Five Paper. As well as our guests, I welcome our esteemed panel of speakers who bring together a varied range of seasoned professional and commercial experience from their respective areas of expertise to offer us insight on this interesting topic. Before introducing them, however, I just wanted to plug the next BNLF event, which will take place in March. It's going to be a seminar on digital assets. The theme is going to be the regulatory and market responses to the adoption and usage of cryptocurrency and other digital assets with perspectives from the UK and Sub-Saharan Africa. And that's going to be on Wednesday, the 29th of March from 6 p.m. at a firm here in London on Chancery Lane called Keystone Law. Hybrid attendance will be possible. Now, it is my immense pleasure to introduce our exceptional speakers for this evening. Unfortunately, in the interest of time, I can only give a summary of their very impressive profiles, but the things I shall mention will leave you in no doubt as to their proficiency in the subject matter to be discussed. So starting first with Olumide Famuyiwa, who is a commercial, financial and international dispute resolution lawyer and partner at Babalakin & Co., a leading commercial law firm in Nigeria with offices in Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt. The firm has nearly 30 years of experience in various aspects of commercial law, practice and dispute resolution. Olumide has been called to the Nigerian bar as well as the bar of England and Wales, having obtained the much coveted BCL and a PhD from Oxford University. He has published articles in corporate law, financial law, and international dispute settlement. Moving swiftly next to Rashida Abdullahi. She is the founder and CEO of Strand Sahara, a legal tech company that works to empower entrepreneurs in the UK and Africa that serve African markets with the world-class legal support and guidance they need to build and scale successful businesses. Rashida is a multi-award winning lawyer and started her career as an international arbitration lawyer at a global law firm not too far from where I'm sitting right now, called Hogan Lovells, or their London offices anyway, where for a decade she represented some of the world's largest corporations in high-value complex disputes. She founded Strand Sahara in 2018 and is also a trustee of the Pimlico Toy Library and co-founder of Black Founders Hub, which is a peer network for high-growth Black-owned professional service businesses. Most recently, in 2022, Rashida was named one of the most influential lawyers of African descent and one of the top 100 African business leaders and entrepreneurs in the UK by the African Business Chamber. Next, Tori Abiola, who is the Chief Commercial Officer at Invest Africa. Invest Africa is a leading business and investment platform with over 60 years experience in Africa. It works to provide its members with bespoke information and exposure to business opportunities. The firm is headquartered in London and also operates from four chapter cities: Johannesburg, New York, Dubai, and Geneva. Tori has worked in business development in Africa since 1999 and recently played an instrumental role in the successful global launch of a $100 million Pan-African venture capital fund. Tori has over 20 5 years experience of delivering events, campaigns, training programs, and strategic projects for organizations with significant interest in Africa and globally. So last but most certainly not the least, Chukwudi Ofili. Chukwudi is the director of legal, parenthesis Africa, and West Africa investment manager at Renew Capital. Renew Capital is an Africa-focused investment firm that manages the Renew Capital Angels, a global network of for-purpose angel investors who seek to generate social impact and financial returns by investing in growth-oriented small and medium enterprises in Africa. Renew Capital operates its exchange hubs across sub-Saharan Africa for organizing capital, building pipeline, providing executive training programs, and supporting investments. Chukwudi is a licensed attorney in the state of New York and in Nigeria. He is primarily involved in active project pipeline management and deal closing as Renew Capital scales up across the African continent. Chukwudi was previously a partner of the highly rated Nigerian law firm Detail Commercial Solicitors, and his international experience includes stints as a visiting lawyer at Trinity International LLP in London, United Kingdom. He has been named a Rising Star Partner and National Leader in Nigeria by the Legal Directory's International Financial Law Review, IFLR, and Who's Who Legal. So, as you can see, those are from some very, very heavy profiles, heavy bios, and as a junior lawyer in Nigeria recently said to me, gauge those bios. So we have a very impressive panel of speakers, and given that time has already been fast spent, I want us to get right into the topic. I welcome all of you, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Olade. Thank you.
You're welcome, Mide. So we'll be covering 3 areas. We'll be talking about our panelists' perspective on the current state of business and trade opportunities in Nigeria. We'll also be talking about how they assess the opportunities for Nigeria to UK trade, investment and mutual exchange. And we'll also be covering the topic of barriers to entry and a consideration of the risks and legal issues to trade and business opportunities. So those are some really big topics. So we'll do our best to cover as much of them as we can in the time that we have left. Just before we start, if you have any questions whatsoever during the discussion, please feel free to use the Q&A function. And I believe that's just right at the bottom of the screen in the middle. Please feel free to use that function to send us your questions, from which we will take questions for the panel during the Q&A section of the evening. So getting right into it then. Perspectives on the current state of business and trade opportunities in Nigeria. Olumide, what are your perspectives on this particular topic?
Thank you, Ololade. Let me first start with official figures from the United Nations Comtrade database. The figures for 2012 to 2021 show clearly, and those are the latest figures actually. They show clearly that the focus of trade between the two countries is still largely on extractives and agriculture. By extractives, I mean oil and gas, and then other mineral resources. And then agriculture, I mean, say, agri-products, cashew nuts, essentially, and then cocoa, right? So Nigeria is exporting those items to the UK. In 2021, which is the latest figure, the value of the import is around $1.2 billion US, right? But in exchange, Nigeria has imported about 536 billion worth of products million worth of products from the UK. These are largely machinery and other tech products. Now, that has not changed significantly between 2021 and now. And again, the trend is what we've seen since the 60s. In fact, before independence, Nigeria exporting agri products, and when we found crude oil, we started exporting oil and gas products to the UK. The focus, I think, should be moving away from extractives, right, and agro-based export to secondary and tertiary services. I will explain what I mean by that. As a Nigerian, I know that can export to the UK. And when I say export to the UK, I don't mean essentially packaging, say, plantain or prawn or yam and sending those to the UK or palm oil. I'm talking about contract manufacturing. What do I mean by contract manufacturing? Where Nigerian companies, right, produce for UK brands. I'm talking to you now, actually wearing Nigerian-made clothes. I can tell you that the suit I'm wearing, the shirt, apart from the tie, they were made by Nigerian tailors. And these are very, very good tailors. So Nigerians spend a lot of money buying UK brands, fashion, and other accessories, right? I've seen here in this country that those brands or those products can be manufactured here, and the UK brands can put their brands on them. In any event, that's what they do when they go to Vietnam and Bangladesh and Korea and all those places to make those products. They make them there and they just put their name on it, they put their brand on it, and they bring them to the UK. And Nigerians fly to London to buy TM, to buy H&C, to buy Styrite shirts made in Turkey, made in Vietnam, right, made in Bangladesh, which can actually be made here. And there is a huge market for those fashion products here. I'll mention a place, for instance, where those things can be made through contract manufacturing is Aba. Aba is in the southeast of Nigeria. In Aba, they can make anything as long as you give them the design. They make bags, they make shoes and all that. Before, we used to joke about products coming from Aba as being secondhand, but I've seen products from Aba that can compete with anyone from anywhere else in the world. So what we can do to grow the trade is to move to that area. That's one, contract manufacturing, right? And then the second one is outsourcing of IT work. Now, Nigerians are now so tech savvy that you don't need actually to take most of the tech work out of this country. In fact, the explosion in fintech in Nigeria is a testimony to the proficiency and the experience of Nigerians in this area. Now, what I've seen living in the UK and then in France and Switzerland is that Western tech companies, they outsource their tech work to Indian companies that then gather Indians to do the work. So for instance, you want to do some data work. I advised not too long ago on a revenue assurance transaction for a telecom company in Nigeria. And all the tech work was being done in India. And the Indian guys were not coming to Nigeria. They would just stay in India, get onto your system from India and do all the troubleshooting and all of that. Everything is done in the cloud. We can do that here. The Yaba area of Lagos has considerable number of tech-savvy young men and women that can do a lot of this outsourcing work. So I think those are areas where the trade between the UK can grow in services as well as in commodities, contract servicing and outsourcing of tech work. Even legal work can be outsourced. And that will stem this flow of Nigerians to the UK wanting to relocate and settle there and all of that. I know that UK companies, they look out for Nigerian lawyers once you train there and you're exposed. I mean, Ololade, you are an example, aren't you?
I think that last phenomenon you were talking about there is the current Japa phenomenon that they.
Yes, so it's going to stem the Japa mentality, right?
Yes.
When you can work in Nigeria and earn British pound sterling and live very well here, live comfortably here. And why do they need to live in the UK anyways?
Well, Mide, you make a very important point, and I think the point you make about contract manufacturing is a very important one. And if I may add, that's a very fine suit, by the way, and I can certainly testify to the point you're making, because this very suit that I'm wearing was recently made in Lagos as well. So I know that we have the talent and the ability to make these products. But let me just bring somebody else in and get their perspectives on this question. Tori, what are your perspectives on this question? And that is your perspective on the current state of trade, state of business and trade opportunities in Nigeria.
Right, thank you very much. I think the reality of the situation, if you look at the DIT numbers, is that from 2021 to 2022, there was actually over an 80% increase in trade. between Nigeria and the UK. So if you're looking at real figures in terms of what's going on in trade between the UK and Nigeria, there is exponential growth in terms of the trade relations. In terms of what is being traded, I think that that's where the opportunity lies for Nigeria. As you mentioned, currently we're looking very much at extractive oil and gas type of product, and we're missing opportunities in other areas where we could be exporting to the UK and where we have a surplus. So we have the capacity to export those goods, and the UK has a need for those goods. So in particular, I would look at areas like cocoa, where we have the capacity to export and meet the UK needs, but currently we are not taking advantage of that opportunity. And there are also some other commodities where there is opportunity for Nigeria to export to the UK. If you look at our aquaculture industry, frozen prawns and fish, we are not exporting to the UK, but the UK has close to £500 million need for importing that product and commodity. And Nigeria does have the capacity for that. So what I'm seeing, just looking at the figures, is that trade is growing. But from an export perspective, Nigeria is missing opportunities where it has the commodities, the products, the capacity to export to the UK, and the UK has a need for those products. So if you like, there's some quick wins and low-hanging fruit in terms of trade that Nigeria can capitalize on. I think the other area that is of interest, which speaks to what we were talking about earlier, the value-added services like technology, like human capital, that knowledge economy, is to look at growing that as well. But I would just put a caveat on that because of the issue of the brain drain that happens from Nigeria, especially in the areas of health, and also even in the area of digitization and technology. I would just be a bit more that because we still have about 200 million people that really need that brain capacity. That would be my only caveat around that. If we could look at telemedicine, you know, digital ways of sharing this information so that we don't lose the brain drain. But I think the general trend is that trade is growing between Nigeria and the UK, but that Nigeria is not fully taking advantage of its competitive advantage by pushing some of the commodities that the UK is in need of. And the UK is still behind as a trading partner, considering they were a former colony and the relationship we have. They are the 11th trade partner to Nigeria, behind China, behind the US. And again, I think the UK can do a bit more in terms of building those relationships and working as a better trade partner to Nigeria.
You mentioned something about you mentioned brain drain, again, this Japan issue. To what extent do you think that issue needs to be addressed for these trade imbalances to improve?
Well, the areas where I see immediate opportunity, because we do some work at Invest Africa with the UK government, and they've just recently launched a developing country trading scheme where they are cutting tariffs and they're cutting tax for some of these areas like cocoa, like frozen prawns, tomato, fertilizer, you know, with the Dangote refineries, Dandata is looking at increasing urea. So there are some key sectors, agro-commodity sectors, agribusiness sectors, where I think that we can still gain competitive advantage, grow our GDP, and grow our trade capacity without cutting into areas as we do in the medical field with health and teaching. So I think that what I'm saying is that when it comes to health, our doctors, our nurses, when it comes to technology, digital transformation, which we all know is very important, I think it's important to keep the local resourcing and the local population served. But where we can look at growing and which won't affect those areas is in the agro-commodity spaces, in fertilizers, in agriculture, in non-oil exports. We can still grow those areas without the Japa phenomenon of losing our doctors, losing our teachers, and losing our nurses.
Thank you very much for that, Tori. Those were some very interesting perspectives, and I appreciate the insights you shared. Chudi, you're still on mute, but I want to throw the question to you. And what's your perspective on the current state of business and trade opportunities in Nigeria?
Yeah, so I totally agree, with Olumide and Tori on their analysis of the current state of business and trade activities in Nigeria. I'll just add to what has been said, because I think they've covered the field, to say that in addition to the DCTS, that's the Developing Countries Trading Scheme that was launched in August 2022, there are other initiatives that are geared towards, promoting trade between the UK and Nigeria. So for example, the Department of International Trade, as DIT, has also supported a number of events to increase trade and investment between the UK and Nigeria, including the West Africa Security Exhibition, right? So I think that was where there was a reception for the Afrexim Bank and the King's College, Abuja Medical Center of Excellence, as well as the Feed Nigeria Summit. I also know that the DIT also organized the Creative Industries Trade Mission, and that was essentially to explore co-production agreements, again, to Olumide's points, right? But in this instance, looking at the creative industry, right? So that's TV, film, music industries, including some partnerships for equipment suppliers and a songwriting camp for I think it's the Commonwealth Games, right? So beyond extractives, beyond conversations around cocoa, fertilizers, I think this is one area that, that seems very promising, right? In terms of trade between UK and Nigeria, that's the creative industry. And then again, I'm a proponent of technology, so I'll go back again to the digital economy, and I know that in Nigeria, you perhaps together with the other NESC countries being Egypt, Kenya, and South Africa, you have the largest amount of developers, right? People who are developing products to solve everyday problems. So in Nigeria, you find that there are a lot of entrepreneurs who are not essentially techpreneurs, as you call them, right? But what they're doing is trying to leverage technology that's as basic, intuitive as possible for the everyday man to solve the problems that we face in Nigeria. And the reality is that when they achieve product market fit, right, and they're able to scale those solutions and products, right, they then contribute to our ability to improve our export quota, right? Not just to the UK, but to other African countries as well, and to other countries in North America and in Asia. And that's, is a very huge potential for Nigeria. And we have a lot of people who have that capacity, but then there's that problem of financing, right? Beyond financing, there's also the problem of skill acquisition, training, and education as well. But all in all, the indices and the stats that we've heard show that there's hope, there's optimism, and there's significant progress in terms of trade.
Excellent, thank you, Chidi. Again, that was quite interesting. Now you touched on what I think might be, in your view, one of the bright spots for the Nigerian economy being the creative industries and the digital economy, essentially. And we all know from recent time that the creative, it's easier, if I can use that term, and forgive me if that's the incorrect term, to kind of export that kind of those kind of services or those kind of products to the rest of the world, in the UK being the focus of this conversation, but we know generally it's easier to export that to the rest of the world. Do you think there's anything about the current state of things in Nigeria that may or may not be impeding the export of our creative, how do I put it, products, if I can put it that way?
So to be honest, I don't think that we have challenges beyond. So from the creative side, right, there's a lot of content, right? We have a lot of creative people, there's talents. But then again, like as with most industries in Nigeria, it's lack of funding, access to finance, right, to help with this production. So I think that's one of the biggest problems. Speaking as a lawyer, another problem is intellectual property issues, right, for creatives. So how do they secure their intellectual property? Because wealth generation, your ability to export, ownership, you know, they're all tied together, right? So if you don't have those protective mechanisms in place, and if there's no understanding of your ownership rights to your IP as a creative, then we have those challenges from the get-go. Other than that, I think that, you know, it comes naturally to Nigerians, and there's an abundance of talent. And I think that's why we need to create, there are efforts to create an ecosystem that allows, you know, for these creative talents to actually grow.
Thank you very much, Chidi. I also want to bring Rashida into the conversation on this topic, the state of business and trade opportunities in Nigeria. What is your perspective on this question, Rashida?
Well, we've heard a lot about the potential, the scope, the potential for things getting better and the upward trajectory. But because of that, perhaps I should add a different perspective or a different spin on the stats that we've heard. And I think I would add, and I would say that actually the current position is abysmal. When we look at it, we see that the Nigerian exports from Nigeria account for 0.4% of UK trade. That's again looking at the DIT figures. And the opposite figure, UK trade accounts for just over 5, almost 6% actually, trade in Nigeria. That is not good. You know, we're looking at multiple times more benefit to the UK. We also discussed the fact very early on, Olumide pointed out that in terms of what is being exported from Nigeria very much reflects what was exported all the way back in the 60s at the time of independence. You know, it was still heavily reliant on the extractives, the raw materials, the agri-products, which in essence see Nigeria as a farm for the world instead of adding value to these products for the benefit of Nigeria and Nigerians. Now, that being said, I am an optimist, and like my fellow panelists, I do see the opportunities, but I think it is important that we really sit back and recognize that the way things are right now, the situation we find ourselves in when it comes to trade between the UK and Nigeria is not good enough. It's failing Nigerians. And I think all of us have, you know, an affinity and love for Nigeria, and we want to do better. We want to see better for our family members, relatives, colleagues, and everyone else in Nigeria. And so we need to, I think, ask the hard questions and really search ourselves and think about what more we could be doing to change things. One of the things that I might touch on as well is the fact that when we look at what Nigeria is importing from the UK, you have on the list, alongside the obvious refined oil that we know it's an outrage really that we still don't have the ability to provide our own refined oil in Nigeria. You have things like textiles, fabrics, fruit and vegetables, for goodness sake. You know, this from the UK to Nigeria, Nigeria obviously being multiple sizes bigger than the UK, much more, much better a climate for growing fruits and vegetables, very skilled artisans, tailors, and people who are able to create the textiles and fabrics that Nigerians need. And so I guess my question would be, should we be focusing so much on trade with the UK, on exports to the UK, when actually our first priority should perhaps be at serving our own community in Nigeria and building up those industries, whether it's the garment, factories, or the fruit and vegetable production, so that we're in a position to, not be so reliant on imports from the UK, build up our own industries, and by the same token, be in a much stronger position to then export to the UK and across the world, across a much more diversified range of goods and services. I know my time is up, so I'll keep it short there, but just thought it was important to get us thinking differently, and to try and spark some conversation around what real change needs to happen and how we can be part of that.
Thank you for that, Rashida. What you said reminded me of something, and the facts are vague to me, but I'm sure other people on this panel will remember the events. But I heard it in the UK and remember reading about it. And there was a point in time a few years back when I think exports of, rice was banned for a period of time. And then that caused all manner of problems because people just went to the black market to buy foreign rice or something to that effect. So to what extent do you think we as Nigerians, especially Nigerians in Nigeria, are kind of hindering a solution to this problem?
Well, people are never the problem. People are always going to act in their best interests in accordance with the incentives that are presented to them. So I think it's a responsibility really of others to make sure that the incentives are in place to make it more palatable for Nigerians to try, a different rice. So I don't blame Nigerians at all. People are going to do what's in their best interests. And if, we haven't seen the production of high quality rice from Nigeria before, then of course you're going to be skeptical. We all have our reasons for wanting to keep ourselves and our families safe. Having said that, on the other side of the coin, I'm hearing anecdotally that, there's been some concern about Chinese manufacturers claiming to produce gari and different types of yam and all of these products which actually are indigenous to Nigeria and seeking to import them or rather export them to Nigeria, and actually Nigerians being wary of that. And being perhaps a bit more reticent because of the unfamiliarity of getting those products from China. So again, we're seeing how the incentives work. So I guess without wanting to avoid the question, I want to say that it's never the people's fault. It's all about incentives, and we just need to do a better job of making Nigerian rice more attractive.
Thank you very much, Rashida. And that's a very interesting anecdote about the Chinese gari. I know I have some aunties that would probably fall off their chairs if they heard about Chinese gari. But anyway, I'll leave that there. So thank you all for your very interesting perspectives on this very first issue. So I want to usher us nicely into our second topic of conversation, and that's your assessment of the opportunities for Nigeria, UK trade, investment, and mutual exchange. We've already touched on this somewhat, but since we were speaking to you, Rashida, I think I'm going to start with you on this one. Could you share your perspectives on that?
Absolutely. Okay, so this is where I can get very positive because I agree there is an enormous scope and potential. If we're at 0.4 now, really we can only go up, right? And so there's a lot that can be gained from increasing that trade to the UK and looking specifically at how we might achieve that. Now, I think we've all talked about the need to move away from the extractives predominance on Nigerian exports to the UK and to the world. And I think, as has already been said, there are so many knock-on effects of that. Leaving the export income aside, there are the jobs that will be created for our young people. There will be the actual development of these industries. You can think about the fact that it takes time to build these industries, to build the expertise, to build the connections, the chambers of commerce, the really important elements of really building a sustainably successful industry within a country, the government support that would be needed. All of that will come when there's more focus on diversifying the exports that Nigeria is seeking to deliver to the rest of the world. And I agree with a lot of what my fellow panelists have said about the opportunities and where they lie. I'm particularly interested in services. I think there's so much potential there. As we have heard, when it comes to the UK, we share a common culture, common language, common legal culture. So I absolutely agree, Olumide, we should be seeing outsourcing of legal work to Nigerians. And, you know, I remember looking at a project in Ibadan that hasn't come to light, unfortunately, but it was looking at setting up a place where you could have a whole ream of paralegals doing a lot of dispute support work for London firms. That's the sort of thing that I think is really exciting for us to think about. There's also, when we look at the fact that Nigeria, the creatives, I have to mention that because it's something that no matter where you are in the world, everybody is aware of a lot of the creative work coming out of Nigeria, whether it's Beyonce wearing Nigerian fashion designers' clothing, or Burna Boy being, I believe, the most expensive artist to book now, you know, over and above the Americans. These are all a testament to the power of our creative industry in Nigeria, and harnessing that, really taking the initiative to, as Chudi said, support those artists, those creators, with understanding their intellectual property assets and helping them protect them with legal rights, such that we're able to really exploit the advantages that Nigeria already, you know, naturally has. In the other areas of potentially agri-products or more refined versions of those products, we do see challenges around transportation, around infrastructure, you know, the fact that you have to pay so much for power, the difficulties of finding skilled managers and having to train people in a way that's quite expensive for businesses. That's something that we see at Trans-Sahara, a lot of businesses wanting to scale up, but struggling in those areas, and ultimately, you know, looking for finance. Well, instead of looking for finance, what about talking to the UK government, because of the, you know, the history, the huge advantages that the UK has benefited from at the expense of Nigeria, and giving back? Why doesn't the UK look at perhaps helping with training, so that we are now in a position where we can export more to the UK? Why doesn't the UK look at how they might be able to assist with, you know, other issues, whether it's around, well, I've mentioned training, but other logistical issues, marketing, whatever it might be. The industries that operate here are obviously much more sophisticated. They've been in operation for longer. They're much well funded. I would love to see some of those benefits, if you like, being afforded to Nigerian businesses, and not just to UK-owned businesses seeking to do business in Nigeria.
Thank you very much for that, Rashida. I remember not too long ago, it was sometime last year, sitting down at a restaurant in Nigeria, having a conversation with a partner at a significant Nigerian firm, and a partner and a senior associate, both very lovely people, and they were at odds as to whether or not, for example, the Nigerian legal market should be welcoming to an import of legal services, and you know, vice versa. And I know recently that legal services from Nigeria have been imported to, for example, London, or exported to London, because a significant Nigerian firm has recently set up in London as well. So these things are happening. But on this topic, I want to move on to Chudi and get Chudi's measure of the opportunities for Nigeria-UK trade.
Okay. So for me, I'll talk about the opportunities from the point of view of an investment opportunity, right? And when I talk about an investment opportunity, I would be talking about the digital opportunity, right? The interesting thing about Nigeria is that despite the political and economic challenges that we face, particularly in an election year such as this, and in the preceding year, that's 2022. Nigeria's GDP and then its teeming population make it an attractive investment destination. So like I mentioned earlier, alongside Egypt, Kenya, and South Africa, Nigeria is known to have received the highest influx of investments with respect to the digital economy, particularly in the fintech space, right? So for me, I say that while population size is important, it is not in itself sufficient, right? I believe that there must be a sizable digital opportunity to make a country interesting as a venture market, right? So Nigeria's digital opportunity, as calculated by a mix of smartphone ownership, internet usage, digital payments, GDP and other inputs, make it an attractive investment destination, right? You know, in my experience, I know that Africa's internet economy, that's including Nigeria's predominantly, is mobile first and mobile only. So why do I say this? This just shows that there's an opportunity when it comes to digital products, right? So be it fintech, health tech, education technology, right, and health tech as well, there's a lot of opportunity because 75% of the online traffic in Africa is generated by mobile phones, which is the highest percentage in the world, right? This then means that, for example, in Nigeria, if you're going to be building, right, a product, if you're looking to invest in a product, which is my focus here, right, you should be looking at persons or companies that are looking to develop products or solutions that have a mobile first approach, right? So that these are products that are optimized for mobile devices, which are easy to use, they're intuitive, accessible to users of different skill levels. And then I think that there's also an opportunity for in the digital space, right? For developers and entrepreneurs who are looking to leverage relationships with telcos, right? Because telcos are a major player in Nigeria's internet economy, and companies that want to succeed, right, should think critically about how to partner with these telcos, right? Lastly, for these entrepreneurs, and if you're looking to invest in entrepreneurs, right, you should be looking for products which are not only online. So these guys should be thinking, so you should be act online, think offline, right? So essentially, you should be building products that are functional to enable users to access and use their products even without internet connectivity. So essentially, I think that there's a lot of opportunity in the tech space. We're seeing a lot of, tech companies, fintech companies in Nigeria who have become, I think the one or two of them have become unicorns now, right? We've seen successful exits. And there's a lot of opportunity there, and they're beginning to solve all the, teething problems that we have. For example, you see the challenges that we're having with payments in Nigeria, currency issues, So I think that technology is where a lot of investment should go into, because there are returns, and then it then facilitates trade, right? That's the ripple effect. And then by extension, for the edutech companies, they've been able to upskill a lot of Nigerians, and then you find that a lot of Nigerians now have jobs, right? I know a lot of them that have created, employment opportunities for Nigerians. So that's also another opportunity. And a lot of these edtech platforms also leverage partnerships with UK educational institutions as well, right? So tech has been able to bridge that gap, right, and create that connection. So for me, the digital opportunity is where I see a lot of promise.
Thank you for that, Chidi. Whilst I have you, there's a question I want to put to you. And it's a question about, in terms of the clients that you see. So you've had quite a rich career in that you were in private practice previously. Now you work for Renew Capital as a director there. What do you hear from, your clients, domestic and foreign, about opportunities and challenges that they are facing when doing business in Nigeria?
So the number one that I hear or I used to hear is regulatory uncertainty, right? I think that's the biggest problem that most people face. So it's when I come into Nigeria to do business, what laws govern, my business activity, right? Is there certainty that if I invest in a company in Nigeria, either FDI or foreign portfolio investments, am I able to repatriate capital, right? The laws say that yes, you can repatriate capital once you have a CCI, that's a certificate of capital importation, etc. But the question is, in reality, do I find the dollars to take out from Nigeria, right? And then there's also the issue around capacity. So now capacity is being affected in terms of skills like labor. It's being affected by Japa syndrome that you talked about. So even in the legal industry, there are now issues around the quality of legal services that you're able to get, right? Because a lot of the top lawyers, right, are already burdened. You don't really have lawyers at the junior level again that you can rely on to provide legal services. So so these are the issues. And for me, what I've always advised, right, anybody who's looking to come into Nigeria is always get legal advice in terms of market entry. So I want to get into Nigeria, I want to do XYZ, right? Meet up with a law firm, a reputable lawyer, and ask, so what are the laws that govern what I'm trying to do, right? So beyond the laws, from your experience as a lawyer who's on ground in Nigeria, right? How does this work practically? What are my chances, right? And when you have that report, you can then make an informed decision in terms of risks. You do a risk analysis, and decide whether you want to come into Nigeria. So you have all the facts, fully before you come into Nigeria. So for me, that's usually the biggest problems that I've heard, which is that regulatory uncertainty and issues with the regulators.
Excellent. Thanks for that answer, Judy. I appreciate it. I want to take this question to Tori next and get Tori's measure of the opportunities for Nigeria-UK trade and investment.
Thank you. What we are seeing, and we've been very focused on really the agro-commodities. I think the current global geopolitical landscape speaks to the need for everyone to look at food security and to look at, what people need on a daily basis. So people will always need to eat. People will always need, healthcare, education. So I'm thinking about what are the opportunities, and because of us going into post-COVID, inflation, all of the economic shocks that we're all going through at the moment, a lot of our investors are now looking at what are the fundamentals, right? What do people actually need? So I think that the agro commodity space, even if you're moving up the value chain from just getting the raw material, if you're processing from just cocoa to actually looking at the value add to chocolate, or you're going from cotton to the value add of, the manufacturing that you mentioned and tailoring, I still really see that as an opportunity which is not fully leveraged currently in Nigeria. And that speaks to a lot of the challenges that my panel colleagues have mentioned around, infrastructure, around lack of access to finance and investment, around lack of access to quality accreditation, and all the market linkages challenges that many SMEs and business people find in Nigeria when it comes to exporting the UK. So I still see the opportunities around the fundamentals being around, agro commodities, even though we are moving away from oil. And I'm seeing the opportunity in adding the value addition around processing. So, getting things into tin, moving up to tailoring, as I mentioned. And again, just to put some optimism around what we're discussing, and going back to Rashida's point, there are countries that have turned around their trade significantly in a 5-year period. So there are countries like South Africa that looked at doubling their trade to the UK in under 5 years. There are countries like Mauritius that have done that. So we are looking at a low level now, but if the right interventions are put into place, there are case studies and examples where we can grow trade from, this under 1% to 5% in by 2030, for example. And there are countries who are comparable that have done this. But yeah, I would definitely be backing the fundamentals if I was looking at investment opportunities in the region.
Thank you very much. I was going to ask you a question about what you think that the UK and other foreign investors are getting wrong about doing business in Nigeria. But the reason why, something you said already indicates to me what your answer might be, and you've looked at what's already being done, and you said, okay, we're already doing this pretty well, the extractives, but we can move up the value chain, and I think that perhaps might be a different way to approach what we are producing for exports, and I think that might be something we can do differently. Anyway, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with you, but I'm also leaning to what my panelist colleagues are saying, which is the need to build local capacity, right? So while it's important to grow trade, there is a real need for us to grow that local base and capacity so that we're not importing horticultural products when we have so much arable land, where we have such a huge population, where we know because of climate change and sustainability issues that we shouldn't be really shipping all these things anyway, and everybody's looking at producing things locally. So I think if I could say where are investors going wrong or foreign partners going wrong, I'm tempted to say where is Nigeria going wrong? And I think that we need to set the tone in terms of how we want to engage with our global and international partners. We need to say that we want to look at value addition, we want to look at local capacity building, we want to look at job creation. And while I think, digital and creatives and all these innovations are great, and it does help because you're looking at smarter farming, you're looking at artificial intelligence in farming, you're looking at AI in medicine and all of that, which is great where you have a resource constraint. We need to ask the questions about what are our plans to build our capacity, and why are we importing things like food and rice when we have, everything to make this happen, and what happened to our cotton industry, which was the second largest employer just, a few decades ago, not even 2 or 3 generations back, and now is totally decimated. And, when it comes to creativity and fashion, again, many of the panelists have talked about amazing, Nigerian wear and fashion and how great we are at that. And we have the land. Why are we not moving up that value chain? And I think until we set those parameters for ourselves, it's very difficult to have that discussion with your international partners, because as Rashida rightly mentioned, the UK is going to be thinking, look, how do I diversify my supply chain? Ukraine and Russia is an issue. How do I find better trading partners? They're not thinking necessarily, and they shouldn't, how am I going to feed 200 million Nigerians? We should be thinking about that. And that's kind of the way that I would look at that point that you raised.
Well, thank you very much for that interesting perspective. I appreciate that, Tori. Olumide, I want to bring this question to you too. I want to hear about your perspectives on the opportunities that are available for Nigeria-UK trade. How do you assess them?
Well, thank you, Ololade. I've been listening to my co-panelists, and I think a lot of the points they have mentioned are not only germane. They are points that we should really look into seriously. I will take off from Rashida's point about energy, the cost of energy in Nigeria, and Tori's point about building capacity. I live in a section of Lagos that is, you can call it the Ibro area, the Lekki section of Lagos. A lot of the people who live in here, they live in gated estates, private estates actually, and they pay heavily for energy. Now, most of these are off-grid energy in the sense that the estates have generators. Now, I'm going to take from there and say, how do you run a country and the largest section of your productive population living and getting by on generator? Most offices are run through generators. Most industries are also the same way. Now, what are the opportunities there for the UK or UK investors? Currently, the UK brings a lot of generators into the country. Perkins, Cummins, they are imported by John Holt, and I think another energy or generator importing company. So they all come here and then they sell generators and that's it. Whereas the electricity sector in Nigeria has been so diversified, I can use the word liberalized, that you can have off-grid power generation. Off-grid power generation in the sense that you can cluster 2, 3, 4 estates and provide their energy without on-selling what you have generated to the national grid or something like that, right? Where I live, the amount we pay for energy, if we have a sort of energy cluster and one energy provider is servicing 3, 4, 5 estates, we'll pay far less. But because the estate is run on generator, so they have to pay for diesel, right? And then they also have to pay a coal electricity distribution company. So there are opportunities here for investors to come in and have off-grid power generating plants. And I can mention the corridors where these plants can be located. Lekki is one corridor, which is going to be essentially residential, right? Apart from Lekki, you have Agbara. In Agbara, you have a lot of industries. Agbara is a section, is a community between Lagos State and Ogun State. That's where you have a substantial number of industries in the Southwest, right? Most of these industries use generator. You can cluster them and have off-grid power generation instead of bringing in generators into the country. That's a very, very viable. And I'm saying this because I've been approached by foreign investors asking me, how can they convert waste in Nigeria, waste to energy and all that, if they can get land from Lagos State government to have these power plants. But their own idea is to generate and then pump that into the national grid. How do you get paid for that? I was involved in an arbitration, and the first IPP project in Nigeria that was established by Lagos State government, the Aaron Power project, Lagos State, it went on the national grid, and getting the money was difficult because once it goes to the national grid, you don't know where it's gets sent to. But if you have it off grid, you are talking directly to your off-takers, the consumers, the people buying your energy. You can bill them directly, and you can get your money directly. And these are the people that are actually paying because it is a pay as you go. That's the way we do it here. If you don't buy your energy point, you don't have light in your flat. So I think off-grid power generation for private residential estates and industrial areas, I think that's a viable opportunity for UK investors coming into Nigeria. And it will really help us build capacity. We've been talking about people rushing out of the country, the Japa mentality. A lot of that is not because they want to go earn good money out there, but it's because the quality of life, right? You come back home, there is no energy, there's no water and all of that. And you live in a country where you take those things for granted. You naturally move there. So let me just stop there.
Well, I think that must be a fundamental point, because if you can have that consistency of energy, then it drastically will improve your quality of life. And that makes way for a lot of other things to happen as well. So I do think that's a fundamental thing that we need to get right. But anyway, thank you very much for that perspective, Olumide. I'm conscious of time, so I want to get us right onto our final topic for the evening. And we want to talk about the barriers of entry, barriers to entry rather, and consider some of the risks and legal issues to trade and business opportunities in Nigeria. For this, I'm going to start with Chudi.
Okay.
So Chudi, please, could you share your insights on that topic?
Yeah, thank you very much, Olawade. I'll just start by saying that, generally, the economic objectives of the government are, so among other things, curb inflation, stabilize the exchange rates, improve balance of trade, and then ultimately drive economic growth, right, through the private sector. And to that effect, full or partial ownership of businesses by foreign investors is then permitted by our extant laws in Nigeria. So you can either enter into the Nigerian business environment through foreign direct investments or foreign portfolio investments. So generally, investors can import capital and freely expatriate and freely repatriate both the capital and the returns on investment, right? If you satisfy the exchange control requirements under Nigerian law, right? It's also important to know that there are specific ownership restrictions and licenses which will be required in regulated sectors, right? Such as in the banking sector, in the telecom space, in oil and gas, aviation, insurance, and more recently, the technological and digital economy, right? It's also important to know that there are fiscal incentives that encourage investments in Nigeria, right? Cross-border transactions are allowed, right? But with some level of restriction to protect the local currency and to prevent things like terrorism and to curb money laundering, right? And on the back of this, right, it's important to consider or be aware of certain laws, right, that deal with entry and also regulate the risks and set out the legal issues when it comes to trading and doing business in Nigeria, right? Currently, Nigeria is ranked about 131st out of the 190 economies in the world on the ease of doing business. So to improve Nigeria's ranking, the Nigerian government through the legislature has been very, very busy and very active. And they've come up with a number of laws and amendments to our existing laws. In my view, the key laws that we should take note of in terms of discussing entry into the Nigerian business environment are the Companies and Allied Matters Act to 2020, which replaced the Companies and Allied Matters Act of 1990, the Petroleum Act, the Startup Act, and this act is aimed at ensuring that Nigeria's laws and regulations are clear and work for the tech ecosystem to attract investments into the tech ecosystem. There are also the different versions of the Finance Act that have been, passed. The concept of the Finance Act started in with the Finance Act 2019. So what the government seeks to do with the Finance Act is to introduce regulatory changes to our tax laws and fiscal regime. And so it's important that we keep track of these changes that have been introduced through the Finance Act. And the more recent one, which has become a very interesting topic for conversation, is the Business Facilitation Act of 2023. So this act amends about 20 business-related laws and removes bureaucratic constraints to doing business in Nigeria. Again, the objective of this act is to promote the ease of doing business in Nigeria and ultimately eliminate bottlenecks, right, in terms of doing business and implementation of these objectives of facilitating trade in Nigeria. So I think that for me, this sets the tone, right, for the other panelists to then have a conversation around this topic. I know particularly my senior colleague, Olumide, would do justice to this, to these laws that I've mentioned and how they actually work to promote trade and, remove all those barriers that we had before now in terms of coming into Nigeria to do business.
Well, thank you very much for that, Chidi. If nothing else, the name of the Business Facilitation Act 2023 is a clear pointer towards the intentions of the people who are backing that, or who have backed and brought that act into place. And given that you mentioned Olumide, I think I'm going to go to him next to get his insights on this question of the barriers to entry and consideration of the risks and legal issues.
Thank you, Ololade. I think I should first mention something, and that's from what Chidi said in terms of fulfilling or complying with capital control regulations in Nigeria. And I'm saying this because I was once involved in tracing funds taken out of Nigeria in violation of capital control. When you are coming into the country and you are bringing in money, either for foreign portfolio investment or foreign direct investment, you should make sure that you get what we call capital importation certificate from the bank that you brought the money in through. That is important because when you are taking out, when you want to repatriate the proceeds of your investment, you will need to show your capital importation certificate. If you do not have that, you can't take out the money. And you don't necessarily have to bring in cash. You can bring that in terms of machinery. You can bring that in terms of expertise. All you need to do is to value what you are bringing in and get a certificate of capital importation. Now it's issued digitally. Before it was in paper. And when you are taking out your money, you endorse behind it how much you're taking out and all of that. All of that is handled by the CBN Trade and Exchange Department. It is important because if you take out the money without the certificate of capital importation, you will bring back about 10 times 10 of what you've taken out, and you will forfeit it to the federal government, right? Most investors don't take note of this, and a telecom company in Nigeria ran foul of this very provision, right? And they took out about $24 billion without correct capital importation certificates. Having said that, let me do a deep dive. I know I don't have a lot of time. A deep dive on the Business Facilitation Miscellaneous Provisions Act of 2023, which Chudi has mentioned. The law has done something rather unprecedented in the history of Nigeria in terms of amending several business and investment related laws. I'm just going to mention about 8 salient provisions of that law that are meant to facilitate easy entry and transparency of business operations in Nigeria. Section 3 of that law now creates what we call transparency requirement. All regulatory agencies are now meant to publish a list of all the requirements that you need to fulfill to obtain approvals or any permit from the agency. So that must be published on their website. And apart from that, Section 4 creates what we call default approval. So if you apply for a permit and you don't hear from the agency within a specified period of time, it is deemed that the approval has been given. And you can then write to the agency to give you the certificate or the approval in formal or in written form. Within 14 days, that must be given to you. So no agency can remain silent or sit on application for approvals anymore. Without doing that, there will be a misconduct. If after writing to them requesting for the formal approval, you don't get it, that's a misconduct. And then we now have what we call a one-stop shop application process, in the sense that if you apply to an agency and your application requires coordination with other agencies, it is the place of that agency you have applied to coordinate with those other agencies. So you don't have to physically carry your files around obtaining approvals here and there. And that is very important because of the bottleneck you have to deal with. And of course, you know, all the bribery or all that tipping people to push your files for you and all that, that's been eliminated. So that has removed the bottleneck and the need for you to carry your files around. Then ministries, departments, and agencies are now meant to have what we call service level agreements, in the sense of stating clearly what you need to do and what they will do in particular situations if their services or approvals or interventions are required. And these agreements are, some of you will know, when you are coming into the country, especially coming in through the ports, you have to deal with several agencies. You pass from immigration to DSS, from DSS to port control, to port health, and all. Everyone is checking your bag, everyone is checking your documents and all of you. That is now eliminated. All agencies that operate in the ports are meant to harmonize their operations and have one portal for checking people coming into the ports. And those who are working there are those who are supposed to be there. If you are not supposed to be on duty, you must not be anywhere near the ports. This is important to curb touting at the ports. Of course, registration of business, there is now a requirement that the CAC, that is the Corporate Affairs Commission, must digitalize and automate all the processes required for registering companies. I mean, the company is out in the UK. You can sit down in Nigeria or anywhere in the world and register a company within 20 minutes. Once you have your credit or debit card with you, you get your certificate. The same thing is in the US. If you want to register what we call a Delaware company, you can do that from anywhere in the world. You get your certificate and all that. I have a company in the UK that only pay all the filing fees and all that, and I'm in Nigeria. So that is what we want to achieve here. You don't have to wait for months to get approval for registration of companies, and you don't have to carry files around. Everything now is digitalized. Apart from those salient provisions, I'm sorry, just a few more things. So a lot of other laws have also been amended. About 21 parts 1 to 21 schedule of the act contains amendments to 21 business facilitating laws. It will be a good read, and my firm is ready to give a comprehensive legal opinion. I'm sorry, I'm advertising it to anyone who is interested in that. We have actually published a newsletter on the changes, the salient changes brought in by that new law. That can be accessed on the website of our law.
Can I just ask you a question?
Yes.
And I'm sorry to cut you short because I know you have a lot to cover on this, and I find this actually very fascinating. I'm very intrigued, and I definitely be looking more into the Business Facilitation Act 2023 myself. But do you think that the environment in Nigeria will actually allow these policies these new laws to create meaningful changes to the way things are done? Because it can have something like statute, and that's very different.
I understand your point. Yeah, you are talking about the implementation factor and the people factor. Yes, it's one thing to have a fantastic law with cutting edge provisions. If you don't have either the will or the environment for that, I think it behoves the incoming government, because the incumbent government has just a couple of months left. They brought in that new law, but I want to believe that the incoming government will see the benefits of giving a lot of push to the enforcement of the provisions of that law, because there's just no way you can operate in the current business environment in the world with the sort of processes we have in this country. If you need to spend months to register a company, if you need to spend a lot of money to come into Nigeria as an investor, if you have to spend hours at the port, if you have to pay a lot of officials, money you don't have to pay just because you have to get approvals, nobody is going to come into your country. And I have to say this, the idea, the philosophy behind this, I mean, the vice president actually drove this idea, Professor Oshimbaju. The idea is to lift the country, right? To lift the country into a modern, right, progressive economy where you can do business quite easily, effortlessly, and in a cost-effective manner. You might want to ask whether it is better to go in and amend each law individually, but I think the approach adopted is actually cost effective because you don't have to amend CAMA, Investment and Securities Act, and all of that. The schedule of is so long, right? So what they've done is to debottleneck business relation, business and enterprises establishment registration in Nigeria, which I think any government should support, regardless of whether that law came in during their tenure or what. So
I think that's right, Olumide. And the reason why I'm coming in here is that I think it's right because we've just gone through a very pivotal time in Nigeria, and the success of this act I think is going to be dependent on the commitment of the next government to making sure that business can be done easily in Nigeria, and I think we've kind of got this framework for it now, and it will be interesting to see how things are implemented going forward. But at this stage, and I'm conscious of time, we're already 5 minutes over the scheduled time, so I would just quickly like to bring in Tori and just get some of Tori's perspectives on the barriers to entry and her thoughts on some of the legal risks and trade risks that she has.
I won't be able to speak as comprehensively as my co-panelists on the legal side.
Yes.
Definitely not a lawyer, but I can speak on the trade barriers, and I can speak on some of those specifically related to those that are looking to export out of Nigeria to the UK market. And then I can also speak a little bit to some of the barriers that investors are finding in terms of FDI when they're coming into the Nigerian market. So in terms of exporting, there is a big area around the customs and the clearing. So that logistics area is an issue. And that's an issue when it comes to accreditation, certification, and making sure that everything is done properly for international markets. So that means that when you're exporting any of your goods, be they sort of the natural produce or the more value added goods, that you've gone through all the necessary requirements to make sure that you have your quality and your assurance certificates done properly. And there's also a big issue around logistics and the ports that you mentioned, some that they mentioned previously. So some of the exporters have issues in getting their products out of Nigeria because of all the delays that happen around the ports and the customs and the clearing. And that's a really big problem that many of the producers face, because there's even an issue of perishable goods. So some of the goods actually go off by the time that they've gone through all the necessary clearances and approvals. There's also an issue around costs, so real costs. So somebody gave an example of it being cheaper to ship something from Lagos to Dubai or from Lagos to Amsterdam than actually driving from Apapa to inland to maybe Ogun State. That cost is actually higher because of all the infrastructure problems. So it will cost you about $5,000 to move a container, apparently, from the Apapa port to maybe just like Ogun State or an inland thing, than going from Lagos to, Rotterdam or Lagos to Dubai with a container. So in terms of just doing trade, there is a real cost to not having this infrastructure right. So I know that some of my co-panelists have spoken about the energy problem, but the logistics problem is the big one for traders. It really does, it's very costly to move their goods. And then from an investor perspective, there is just that issue of the perception, right? The risk perception. And it doesn't help with all the issues we had around FX. It doesn't really help around all the issues we have in terms of our currency and just all of the risks around going in, investing at a certain amount, and then what happens to the exchange rate and how you're just managing that, and also the inflationary pressures. So from an investor perspective, just getting those macroeconomic indicators right and managing them would help us a lot in terms of getting interest from FDI perspective.
Thank you very much for that, Tori. I appreciate your perspectives on that. I would like to quickly bring in Rashida so that we can hear Rashida's views on the question of barriers.
I don't think I've got that much to add, which for anyone who's got questions might be good news. It's wonderful to hear about the new legislation. I think it's very promising. Of course, the implementation is important, and it's all about resourcing, making sure that all of these departments have the appropriate resources to actually be able to deliver on the legislation that they've been tasked to deliver. So I hope that the Nigerian government sees that this investment in its institutions, in creating these laws, is going to pay dividends and is frankly necessary if we're to avoid, an uprising or a very dangerous and depletive continuous series of JAPAs going on and all of the amazing young talent that Nigeria has and leaving. So I'll leave it there. I'm optimistically watching this space on the legals.
Well, thank you very much for that, Rashida. Like a lawyer, you were very succinct. So I'm grateful for that. So I want to thank all of you for your very insightful views that you've shared. I would just check to see whether or not we have any questions for you in the Q&A section. It doesn't appear that we have any questions. It appears that you're all masterful advocates and you've mastered your topic so well that you've explained it in such a way that no one had any questions whatsoever. I'm really impressed. Thank you all very much.
Or we talked them out of it.
Well, there is one question I will ask actually, and I think I want to put this question to Rashida. And the reason why I want to put it to Rashida is because of what Rashida said at the very beginning in relation to the first question I asked. I think what Rashida said was the current state of the trade situation between Nigeria and the UK is abysmal. I want to put this question to Rashida. Are the risks of investment or trade in Nigeria overestimated?
By whom?
Well, you tell me. From your perspective, is it overestimated by some or is it overestimated by others?
I suspect it's not over that there isn't a problem when it comes to Nigerians doing business, the business owner. But yes, from foreign and I mean, I'm in two minds on this, because whilst I was at Hogan Lovells, I was actively part of the Africa practice there, a lot of work in Nigeria and elsewhere across the continent. And quite frankly, there are a high number of foreign-owned multinationals who count Africa as their largest markets, or rather their most profitable markets. Whether you look at the aviation field, the beverages, food and drink, pharmaceuticals, nappies, toiletries, right? They understand the scale of the opportunity. They're doing very well, incredibly well, and actually are taking advantage of some of the regulatory issues to do things in the continent that perhaps they can't get away with elsewhere in the world. So they absolutely don't have any issues with assessing the risk. But often when it's people who are just looking to invest money in African run businesses, then there is a bit of reticence there. And I would, I think it'd be remiss of me to not mention, obviously, Nigeria's history and what goes with that, the colonialism, the accompanied racism that went with that, and the fact that there are still a lot of attitudes about what Nigerians are capable of and not capable of. And those inevitably are going to have an impact when the people who are sitting on the large pots of money are predominantly in one part of the world without much exposure to Nigeria at all. So yes, ultimately, I think there is there's definitely an element of some people over-egging the risks, but I think it's because of their own ignorance, quite frankly, more than anything else.
Well, thank you very much for that, Rashida. And I think I do agree with your conclusion on that. I want to use this opportunity to thank all of you. It is at this point in a seminar that we would all get up and clap our hands and thank you for speaking. But in lieu of that, I can only express my deepest gratitude to each and every single one of you it appears that we have one question that's come up as I was giving my thanks. All right, we're already behind, but I think I might. Okay, let me just put this to you guys and then we'll wrap up very quickly thereafter. How can the private sector engage with the government in implementing business laws and regulations? All right, is anyone keen to try their hands at that question?
I can answer that.
All right.
So
please go ahead.
I think we're already doing that. And that is being done through the Nigerian Bar Association section on business law. Right. In fact, what you are seeing in the new law, the Business Facilitation Act, had the input of the SBL, the section on business law. We can scale that up and not only influence the enactment of the law, as well as the enforcement of the law by setting up a joint monitoring committee. Say, for instance, we are looking at the performance of certain agencies. We don't leave that to an agency of the government to monitor. So the private sector, the users of the services of these government agencies, can form an implementation monitoring committee, like a sort of pressure group, to say, yes, government, yes, we have this law now. This is not being done the way the law requires it to be done, because you can't let the government be the ombudsman for its own performance. I mean, that is invidious, of course. So you want to set up an implementation committee that will have members or representatives from key government agencies or the relevant government agencies, but predominantly driven by the private sector. That's how you can engage with them real time and say, CSE, for instance, yes, the law says you should digitalize and automate your processes. You have not done that yet. This is the cost that is impacting on our business. You want to talk about the ports, for instance. Story talked about the cost of the logistic issues in moving stuff out of the ports. That is what that law is meant to remove, right? When you have, say, the Clearing and Forwarding Agents Association, right, being part of the monitoring process or the implementation of the debottlenecking of the ports, then you can have some impact. But you cannot just sit back and say, government should tell us or give us a report of performance on the implementation of the laws. The private sector should drive an implementation monitoring mechanism with the involvement of relevant agencies.
Thank you very much for that, Olumide. I think that's a very good answer, to be honest. But I'll leave the questioner to be the judge of that. But I think that's a very interesting perspective. Given that those are all the questions and we are significantly beyond time, I thank all of you for your patience, both guests and panelists, and I thank you for giving us more of your time as well. Like I was saying earlier on, I thank you for giving your time to the BNLF to join this panel and to share your insights with us and to have this conversation with us. It's part of the sort of discourse that we need to be having in order to push things in the right direction. And I thank you for being willing to share your expertise. I also thank our guests for attending the webinar. Again, I use this opportunity to remind all of you about our next event on the 29th of March. This will be an in-person seminar at Keystone Law on Chancery Lane in London, a seminar on digital assets. This webinar has been recorded and shortly will be uploaded to the BNLF's YouTube channel so that all those who are interested in this conversation can watch it again and again and again. So anyway, it will be there for your perusal. And information about joining the BNLF membership and our new online members directory, which we hope will assist in the facilitation of legal trade between lawyers here in the UK and lawyers in Nigeria, can all be found on our website. So it's quite on topic, to be honest. So that launched just a few days ago. And our website is www.bnlf.org.uk. And on that note, thank you all. Have a very, very lovely night. Or I think it's night everywhere all of us are. So have a very, very lovely night and take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much, Ololade, and thank you, my co-panelists.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, thank you, everyone. That was brilliant. Thank you so much. It was extremely insightful. Thank you for all your wonderful contributions. We're really, really incredibly grateful. Thank you. I know how busy all of you are. You know, even Chudi's here, well, work holiday, and he still took time to participate in this. So he's actually in the UK at the moment. So thank you to all of you. That was extremely, extremely insightful. Thank you for participating in this event. We're really, really grateful. And as I said, there's a lot they were saying we're going to upload it to our YouTube channel. So once that's done, I'll send you all a link. But thank you once again. Sorry, as I said, my camera's not working for some reason, but thank you all once again. And yeah, I'm sure we'll meet again in some other forum. Thank you. Very, very grateful.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you. Bye. Bye.